President Obama has cited former Presidents Nelson Mandela of South Africa and George Washington of the US as true examples of true leadership. Without any direct reference to China, Obama made clear that Washington would strengthen its trade endeavors to compete with developed nations investing in Africa. Spector is an independent commentator and former US diplomat. He joins us now via Skype. Thanks for joining us, Brooks. Now, the timing of this trip, is it not too late for the American president?
Well, I mean, too late, it depends a great deal on what you mean by too late. Barack Obama still has close to a year and a half left in his presidency, and all presidencies in America eventually end according to a relentless timetable. I think it's important to put it in the framework of saying that pretty much everything in the broad sense that was in his speech today follows on points that have been made consistently right back to his first visit to Africa as president when he went to Accra, Ghana back in 2009, where he talked about the coming new generation of Africans, younger leaders, younger entrepreneurs, younger professionals in business, all of whom are anxious to push the older folks, the traditional big man in Africa, off the scene and get on with the business of growth and development and economic improvement. And I think just in the last week or so, if you look at what's happened in Washington and now Kenya and in Addis Ababa, there was the state visit of Muhammadu Buhari from Nigeria, very, very high visible, high profile visit. Then almost immediately thereafter, there was the signing into law of the new version, the 10-year version of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And then, of course, there is the visit to Kenya and Ethiopia. A lot of it, if you were looking for earth-shattering breakthroughs, major new initiatives, you were probably looking for the wrong things. If you were looking for a rhetorical restatement of key points, a great sense of the symbolism of those points, and an underscoring of the ideas that the Obama administration has been pushing right along, that is what you got. But the symbolism of meeting the entirety of the African Union, well, not everybody, obviously, but many representatives from many nations gathered together in that one room, following last year's visit of African leaders to the U.S., I think that shows the kind of consistency that the Obama administration was trying to achieve. Whether they got it or not is a different question, but that, after all, was what they were trying to get.
Now, Obama has made clear his dismay of African leaders who extend their term of office. How should the African Union take this forward?
Well, I think there should be a statement of principles from the African Union. I mean, if you're asking me what I would hope for ideally, it would be a statement of principles by the organization that no president, no prime minister, depending on the nature of the government, should overstay the term limits that are part of the respective constitutions of the individual countries. That would, even if countries honor it in the breach by insisting on doing it anyway, the very statement of it by the entirety of the African Union would say a very powerful message, and it would, I think, give a certain amount of hope to the people in the countries throughout the continent that this does represent a kind of turning point. Whether it would always be honored, well, of course, that's a very different kind of question, and we only have to look a few hundred kilometers north of where we're sitting to note that particular fact.
Now, are we not seeing Obama head back home and his plea falls on deaf ears, looking at what he said about corruption and all of that?
Well, it's very hard to say that we'll all wake up tomorrow morning and every country on the continent will have been cleansed of corruption, political corruption, business corruption, illicit transfers of earnings, illegal transactions of prohibited items. None of us should expect that would happen. What you can hope for is that gradually, as trade and export growth and economic development begins to become ever more important for many countries, that the kinds of corruption that the president was speaking about, and which I think was underscored by the commission chair of the African Union, Nkosana Dlamini-Zuma, in her extensive opening remarks. I think you see the beginnings of a consolidation of support for those ideas. Whether they will happen in 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, of course, that's a whole different kind of question.
Now, let's talk about an Obama release from the pressures of office. Could he be a powerful and effective campaigner for change on the continent of his father's birth when he leaves the White House?
It's very hard to predict what he would do. When he leaves office in January of 2017, he will still be, in relative terms, a young man. He will still have years ahead of him of worthwhile and significant contributions to make. What he'll do with that energy and that interest and that engagement, that of course is an individual kind of question. He's obviously too young to be made one of the elders. It's unlikely that he would gain a significant official position going forward. But there is a huge world of major international organizations, NGOs, political action organizations, multinational organizations, foundations. There's an enormous universe of such opportunities, and given the kinds of things he was saying in his speech today, you could easily see him taking an increasingly active role in building further connections between the various countries of Africa, both between themselves and with the United States. You'll note in the various speeches that took place today, there was a certain amount of emphasis in economic terms on the fact that many countries on the continent really have very little trade with one another. And of course, it's probably easier to export things, sadly, from an African state to Europe or the United States than it is to go across the continent with that same bit of goods or services.
We'll have to leave it there, Brooks. Thank you very much for joining us.